screen now? Okay. Okay, so basically I'll discuss what's DevOps. We will discuss what Chef is, how Chef fits into the DevOps pipeline, what's the Chef architecture, what are the various ways or topologies in which you can install Chef. Like you can have a multi-node architecture, or you can have a single server sort of setup as well. What are various Chef components, like workstation, etc., and so on. Various tools, command line tools, as well as the GUI-based tools. Then we will also discuss what's the concept of roles and environments in Chef. If you have used these sort of concepts in other technologies, like let's say Puppet, then you will notice that Chef is very similar to Puppet. So overall, both Puppet and Chef, they have the exact same goal, which is basically to automate your infrastructure and so on. Okay, so let's get into these topics. So first of all, let me give you a quick overview of DevOps. So basically, DevOps, it's very commonly utilized these days, especially by the Agile shops. So if you're into Agile methodologies, like let's say Scrum, etc., and so on, you can choose to utilize DevOps. Even without Agile, you can still choose to use DevOps. Basically, the main goal of DevOps is to make sure that your software delivery is more continuous. So you should have all the phases like develop, test, etc., and so on. So all the phases should be there, and you should try to automate as many aspects of your development as possible. So development, testing, deployment, everything should be streamlined. So DevOps, basically, it's an Agile-based process, and you definitely get to use some tools for implementing DevOps. In just a bit, we will discuss how Chef can be utilized for automating things in your DevOps pipeline and so on. DevOps basically helps you in streamlining your development, testing, deployment, and operation phases. So you first of all develop your software, you test it, you perform various types of tests, unit testing, etc., and so on. You deploy your code for the sake of just staging it in the beginning, just to see whether it's working properly or not. And then after that, you'll also want to make sure that it's handed over to the operations team members as well, so that they can deploy it, make sure that it's available to the entire organization and so on. So basically, we can choose to automate quite a few of these phases. That's where Chef will be very useful. And before I discuss Chef, let me just quickly go over this tools list that you can choose to use for implementing DevOps. So for code versioning, just so that you can check in, check out the code, you can use get, svn, cvs. For the sake of building your software, you can utilize Maven, or in case of Microsoft-based tool set, you can choose to use MS Build. So basically, you can utilize various open source options if you want, for the sake of automatically building some software, etc., and so on. And for the sake of continuous integration, you can choose to utilize Jenkins. It's an open source software. It's definitely very popular. For the sake of checking your code quality, whether there are potential bugs or issues in your code. So basically, sort of using the lint sort of concept. So you can identify whether there are potential pitfalls or pitholes, etc., in your code. For that, you can choose to utilize this open source software called SonarQube, or in case of .NET-based development, you can choose to utilize FXCOP as well if you want. Then as part of DevOps, you might also want to monitor your applications as well, like how much RAM is being consumed, etc., and so on. What's your net, etc. And so for that, you can choose to utilize Nagios. And more importantly, the main scope of this particular webinar is Chef. And Chef is basically used for automating quite a few aspects, or for automating your DevOps sort of process and so on. So for the sake of automation, you can utilize Chef, you can utilize Puppet as well, and definitely you can utilize just simple scripting as well, like Bash, shell scripting, Python, Ruby, etc., and so on. So the main scope of this webinar is Chef, so let's discuss Chef. So Chef, as we discussed previously, it's basically used for automating quite a few aspects. For example, you can choose to utilize use it for setting up your development environment as well as the test environment. Like usually we have to install development tools, we have to install version control software, we have to install continuous integration sort of software, and quite often we also have to set up the virtual machines as well so that we can have everything installed, all the development tools installed in some virtual environment. So even the virtual environment can be set up by utilizing Chef. So I'll go over that in just a bit. But in short, Chef is used for automating various aspects of your DevOps-based steps that you usually perform and so on. So it's a configuration management software which allows you to install software. You can version your software as well and so on. So you can say you want to have certain version for your JDK or for .NET framework, etc. and so on. So it's basically a configuration management software. You use it for automating your software deployment. You can use it for creating your configuration files as well. Like quite often you get to create, let's say in case of .NET Framework, you get to create web.config file, app.config file, etc. and so on. So you can utilize Chef for the sake of generating those configuration files as well. So basically Chef is meant for automating lots of aspects. It's also infrastructure as a code. So infrastructure means we should set up the virtual machine, let's say, or we should have some physical machine, and we should install development software on it, like JDK, .NET Framework, etc., and so on, PHP, MySQL, sky's the limit. So whatever development software is required, you can install that. So setting up of the development environment as well as the test environment. So that's basically your infrastructure. So all that can be done by using Chef. So Chef, it's infrastructure as a code. And what's the meaning of as a code? So what it basically means is that rather than installing just the binary files, like installing the exe files, MSI, installer files, etc. and so on, and then not knowing what we have already installed and what needs to be installed, what needs to be updated and so on. When we use Chef, it manages infrastructure as a code, which means that you get to open your infrastructure as a text file. You can say, I need to have certain operating system installed. I need to have certain virtual machine installed. I need to have certain version of certain development tool installed. So basically, you get to record all that stuff as code. And to be more precise, you get to maintain that in Ruby, basically. Because Chef is written in Ruby, and you get to use Ruby for the sake of managing your infrastructure and so on. So since it's maintained as a code, the infrastructure is maintained as a code, so there are lots of benefits as well. So one benefit will be that it's repeatable. So once you have written the code, you can run that code on some other machine as well. It will have the exact same configuration. You will have the exact same OS. You will have the exact same versions for your various development tool, etc., and so on. You will have your test environment as well, and so on. So it's repeatable, basically, and it's versionable as well, which means that you can say for some legacy application, we need to have certain JDK version, certain .NET Framework version. So likewise, if you have, let's say, Tomcat, Nginx, whatever software you need, you can say I need to have certain version of that software and so on. So it's versionable, basically. You can always install a certain configuration or certain version of each software. And it's testable as well, which means that Chef comes with certain testing-based tools that I'll discuss later on in this webinar. For example, it comes with something that is called Test Kitchen. So Test Kitchen allows you to run your code that you have written for the sake of representing your infrastructure. So that code can be tested. You can set up a virtual environment by using a Vagrant and Test Kitchen, and you can see whether the script that you have written installs the desired packages and a certain version of each package or not, and so on. So it's testable as well, basically. Unlike just installing some exe file or sort of a MSI file for setting up your dev environment, when you write the code for representing it will be testable, versionable, and repeatable. And since it's basically going to help you in the overall DevOps cycle as well, so what it means is that you can use it for setting up your development environment. You can even use it for triggering your build as well. You can use it for testing your software as well as for the sake of deployment as well. So say you have created your Tomcat-based WAR file, etc., and you want to deploy it. So you can use Chef for the sake of deployment as well and so on. And like I mentioned, it's written in Ruby, so you get to write the code in Ruby for the sake of representing your development / testing environment, or in short, your infrastructure basically. So Chef can be used in various scenarios. Like I mentioned previously, you can use it for setting up a virtual machine or multiple virtual machines. You can utilize, let's say, VMware-based images or Hyper-V or VirtualBox. So pretty much every major virtual software can be utilized. Then you can use it for installing the OS as well. You can utilize it for downloading software packages. Like you can download, let's say, Apache web server, etc., and so on. You can install Apache. Plus, you can also create configuration files as well. So you can say that when, let's say, you install Apache web server, then it should run on certain port. So you can modify the configuration file by utilizing Chef. So it lets you create configuration files as well. And later on, I'll discuss another concept which is called environments. So environment lets you create multiple environments like production environment, test environment, and you can have a different configuration file for each environment. So in a dev environment, you could use port number 80. In let's say, in production environment, you could use port number 80, and in a dev environment, you could use port number 8080 and so on. So you can generate configuration files. You can also use it for deploying files, or let's say uploading files to any web server or to FTP server, etc., and so on. And you can definitely use it for deploying your application / software. Plus, you can also trigger and run other scripts as well. So say if you already have lots of bash shell scripts or PowerShell scripts, etc., you can run them from Chef. And again, it doesn't matter what OS you're using. So Chef runs as it is. So principles are as it is, regardless of what OS you use. So basically, you write the code that's agnostic of the OS on which you are trying to install and trying to utilize Chef. Chef is very popular. It's being used by various major companies and so on. And license-wise, you can utilize the open source flavor of it if you want, which is actually good enough. You can utilize every feature under the sun, even when you're utilizing the free of cost open source solution option. It's just that the number of machines that you can utilize as part of your Chef configuration will be a bit limited. Whereas if you go for private Chef, which is also sort of your enterprise Chef, there's no limitation on how many nodes you can have. In fact, Facebook conducted a test to see how many nodes can be supported by Chef. So they were able to add 100,000 nodes, and it still worked. So you can have pretty much as many nodes as you want. Open source wise, there are very few limitations. Like I mentioned, just the number of nodes that are supported. Other than that, you can utilize pretty much every other feature. Or you can say that no, we don't want to install it on our local machines, or we don't want to have on-premises setup. In that case, you can contact Chef. You can purchase a license so that you can host the projects on Chef's server and so on. Okay. So other platforms-wise, you can install it on Linux, Mac OS, as well as Windows as well. So all major OS are supported. And again, it's agnostic of the OS itself. So when you say that you want to install, let's say, JDK, Nginx, and other software, other services, etc., it's agnostic of the OS itself. So it doesn't care what OS you're running on. It just cares for the code that you have written. So in just a bit, I'll discuss the code as well. So usually we use Ruby for that. Before we discuss the code, let's quickly discuss the architecture as well, or the installation strategies. So you can choose to install it in something that is known as local mode, which is okay for learning Chef, but not okay in production environment. So local mode means you will install everything, the server component as well as the client component on the same machine. So it's okay for just testing and learning Chef, but ideally you'll want to utilize the second configuration or the strategy, which is multi-node. So in case of multi-node, you will basically have at least one Chef server. On the server, we deploy something that is known as a cookbook. In just a bit, I'll talk about cookbook in more detail. So cookbook is essentially a collection of recipes. And what's a recipe? Recipe is basically some sort of action that you want to perform. Say you want to install Apache web server, you want to install MySQL, you want to install PHP, so whatever you want to install. So each recipe basically is an action. So what exactly you want to accomplish. And when you group multiple recipes together, the related recipes together, that's called a cookbook. So on server, you're essentially deploying cookbooks. So you'll have at least one Chef server. One is usually more than sufficient. And each recipe is basically a Ruby file. So here you get to deploy your cookbooks, and then you also get to have multiple either physical machines, or you can have cloud-based instances, or you can also have hypervisor-based instances like VMware, VirtualBox, Hyper-V, etc., and so on. So you can have multiple machines basically. So you can say this is going to act as a database server. This will act as, let's say, the web server, etc. You can have multiple web servers if you want. So it's up to you. You can have multiple machines basically. Then, as part of the configuration, multi-server, multi-node configuration, you'll also want to have another machine here, which is called a workstation. So workstation is basically sort of a client machine. This is where, as developers, you will get to write the code. You will deploy the code onto this Chef server. So basically, the code is nothing but just collection of recipes or the cookbooks that you're deploying onto this server. Then you are specifying on what machine, what node actually. So these are called nodes. So on what node, what recipe you want to run. So you basically get to configure something that is known as run list for each node. So run list, it's a term used in Chef that basically specifies what actions you are trying to perform and on what node or nodes you're trying to perform that action. So usually we on this workstation. So as developers, you get to use workstation. This is sort of a client-side component. And you can also have multiple workstations, obviously. So if there are multiple developers in your organization, obviously you want to have multiple workstations. So you get to create the cookbooks, deploy the cookbooks onto the server, and then configure your nodes and so on. So when you add these nodes to your Chef server, that is also called bootstrapping of a node. So bootstrapping means the server is becoming aware of the nodes on which it will be able to deploy the code and so on. So basically, this is the ideal setup, or sort of a production-oriented sort of setup. Local mode is okay for testing, etc., and so on, but not so okay for production environment. Then tools-wise, let me give you a quick overview of it right away. So tools-wise, on the workstation, the client-side tool, the client machine basically, we get to use a tool which is called Knife. So Knife is part of Chef's SDK. I'll talk about SDK as well in just a bit. And you use it for connecting to your Chef server, for uploading your cookbooks, for managing your nodes, for configuring your environments, roles, etc., and so on. And like I mentioned, Cookbook is basically a collection of recipes, and each recipe is basically the smallest unit of action that you can perform. So the smallest action that you can perform is called a recipe basically. And each recipe is a Ruby file. So as part of your recipes, you can say you want to install some software, or you want to create some configuration file, or you want to start, stop, restart some service like Apache web server service, etc., and so on. You can also create user accounts as well. So Cookbook is a collection of multiple related recipes. You can create these cookbooks from scratch. That's what we mostly do. But you can also utilize some off-the-shelf cookbooks as well. So say if you want to install Nginx or you want to install Apache Web Server, then rather than writing a cookbook for it from scratch, you can choose to download the cookbooks of this website as well, which is called Chef Supermarket. So I'll talk about Chef Supermarket in more detail in just a bit, but in short, it's a repository of pre-created cookbooks that you can choose to use. Plus, you can modify them as well if you want. Then recipes, we have discussed this already, that it's basically a Ruby file that lets you perform various actions. So actions-wise, you're basically manipulating resources. What's a resource? Resource is anything that you're trying to manipulate. For example, you can manipulate directories. So you can say, as part of my development machine setup or environment setup, I need to have create certain directories where I should be able to store my files, my source code, etc., and so on. So you can manipulate the directories. You can manipulate files. You can create files. You can delete files. So creation file-wise, you can create the configuration files for various software, like for Apache Web Server, etc., like on what port number you want to run the web service and so on. You can create your web.config file, app.config file. So sky's the limit. You can create files basically. For files, we also get to use another concept which is called template. So template, it basically lets you organize the content of certain file with ease. So rather than saying you will hard code some string-based data and you will concatenate Ruby-based code for the sake of generating the port numbers dynamically, etc., and so on. So rather than mixing and matching Ruby code and string-based code, we get to utilize something that is known as a template, which allows us to organize the content of certain file with ease. Then we can also manipulate remote files as well. For example, you can connect to some remote web server, upload, download files, and so on. You can also manipulate packages. So like I mentioned, you can install, let's say, Apache Web Server package. You can install MySQL, PHP. You can install pretty much any major package that you want, even JDK, etc., and so on. You can also manipulate services, like you can stop Apache Web Server, restart Apache Web Server, or some other service, and so on. You can also create user accounts, delete user accounts, create groups, add accounts to the groups, and so on. So you can basically automate user account creation, group assignment, etc. as well by using Chef. Plus, you can also execute some external scripts as well. So say if you already have a Bash shell script or Ruby-based script, PowerShell-based script, and so on, you can even execute that as well. Talking about scripts, doesn't matter what OS you're using. So you can have Windows or you can have Linux. So now Bash is available on Windows 10. It's available on Windows Server as well. Likewise, PowerShell is available on Linux now. So PowerShell has gone open source. Now it's available on Linux. So basically, these days, the code that you get to write is pretty much agnostic of the OS that you're planning on using. Plus, you can also schedule various cron jobs, etc., and so on. So basically, this is the sort of code that you get to write. Now, before I show you the code, let me show you some tools as well. So let me first of all discuss some tools before I show you the code that we usually get to write. So tools-wise, you basically will have to install Chef Development Kit and Chef Server. So at least these two things are required. So Chef Server and Chef Development Kit. So as the name suggests, Chef Server is the server component that will let you host, store the cookbooks, and so on. It will contain configuration like how many nodes you have, on what node, what recipe you're trying to execute. And Chef Development Kit is basically the development kit that contains various tools that you get to use for the sake of creating the cookbooks, the recipes, uploading the recipes, and so on. So let me give you a quick overview of some of these tools. So two tools are mandatory. You'll want to install Chef Server as well as Chef Development Kit. One of them is optional but highly recommended, and that is called Chef Manage. So Chef Manage, it's basically a web-based console. It's basically meant for visually or graphically looking at your Chef Server's configuration, how many nodes you have, on what node, what recipe is getting executed, etc. So for that, you can choose to install Chef Manage as well. So the third tool is optional but highly recommended. So Chef Development Kit it's a must. Chef Server, it's a must. And Chef Manage, it's optional but highly recommended. So let me first of all show you this Chef Manage here. So let me quickly go to my Linux environment here. Again, it doesn't matter. You can have Linux or you can have Windows. It doesn't matter. You'll have exactly the same command line tools. You'll have the exact same website. You'll have to write the exact same code. So that's the beauty of Chef. It's infrastructure as code that's agnostic of the OS. It knows what OS you're utilizing Chef on. It will install the packages, etc., and so on accordingly. So let me first of all quickly show you this Chef, or let me first of all see what version I have installed here. So Chef-wise, I have version 12 installed. Let me go to the Chef Manage console here. So URL-wise, when you install Chef Manage, you get to configure the URL here. On my side, I've configured it like this. Let me log in here. Okay, so here, this is the Chef Manage web console. It basically lets us look at how many nodes are bootstrapped, how many nodes are connected to this particular Chef server. So currently, I have just a single node. But obviously, at work, you will want to have multiple nodes so that you can have database server running on one node, a web server on a different node, a load balancer on a third node, and so on. So sky's the limit. You can have as many nodes bootstrapped as you want. And like I mentioned, that there's virtually no limit at all. So Facebook conducted the test, and they were able to add over 100,000 nodes. So that's insanely huge number of machines, either physical or virtual, that you can add to your Chef environment. So here currently I have just one. It's a Linux-based node. Then you can look at your cookbooks. Currently I don't have any cookbook deployed at all. So in just a bit, I'll create a cookbook from scratch. I'll upload it as well. Then we will see how we can configure the run list for a certain node, like what recipes should execute on a certain node and so on. So in short, Chef Manage, it's a website that's used for visually or graphically interacting with the Chef server. It's optional but highly recommended. Otherwise, you can accomplish everything by using the command line tools as well. Command line tools wise, we have a tool called Ohai. Let me give you a quick overview of this tool. Ohai, basically, it runs on all the nodes plus the Chef server, and it basically captures the attributes. It captures various information like the OS level, OS related information, like what OS you're using, what's the version. It captures various libraries or various other development tools versions as well. For example, what Ruby version do you have installed. It also captures, let's say, how many CPUs you have, what's the speed, how much RAM you have, how much RAM is free, and so on. What's the purpose of capturing all this information? So technically speaking, Chef does require this information, so it can know whether you are allowed to upload more recipes or not. Maybe you're running low on disk space. So why try to forcefully upload more cookbooks when there's next to no space left? When there's next to no memory left, why cause extra overhead on the machines and so on? So basically, under the hood, Chef does make use of those attributes. But as developers, you can use these attributes on day-to-day basis yourself as well if you want. For example, you want to write a recipe that checks how much RAM you have, or let's say how much free RAM you have. So if you have less free RAM left, you can say, oh, I'm not going to start the web server on this particular node, or I'm not going to create certain databases on a certain machine if the disk space is very low. So you can basically make some decisions when you're writing the recipes for the sake of creating databases and so on. You can make some decisions based on these attributes that are provided by Ohai. Let me briefly show you how we can use OHI from command line for now, but in real world, you'll want to utilize it from the code in the Ruby based code basically. So here I'm typing in OHI. It will basically list all the attributes that it has captured. So here we can see chef version as well. Plus, if I, let's say, type in OHI, I can type in memory. So here it's listing just the memory that we have on this machine. If you want to obtain just the free memory, I can specify this sub attribute here, so OHI memory /free. So basically, this is JSON-based file or JSON-based data that's captured by Chef, or to be more precise, OHI component of Chef, so that Chef can utilize this information for the sake of keeping track of the free disk space, etc., and so on. So here we have obtained the free disk space, or free sorry, in this case it's free memory. Okay, so likewise there are lots of other attributes that you can capture. So that's basically the purpose of OHI. It's primarily a command line tool that can be used for capturing attributes, or you can choose to use it from within your code in your Ruby code as well. Then another command line tool is called Chef. Chef is a very useful tool that can be used for creating new cookbooks, for uploading cookbooks, for creating recipes, for creating environments, for creating roles, and so on. So Chef, it's a command line tool for creating various components from command line. So let me briefly show you Chef as well. We can use Chef for the sake of creating a new cookbook. So for this purpose, let me quickly go to this folder here. So documents, I'm already in documents. Let me go to my Chef repository. Chef repository, it's basically a special folder structure that you need to have in order to execute your, let's say, tools like knife, etc., and so on. So it would be a bit out of the scope to discuss how we create this repository or how we create the structure, but keep in mind that Chef repository, it's basically a special folder structure. This is how we organize the cookbooks, roles, environments on the client side, on the workstation machine basically. So that's how we organize things. Okay, so here let me create a new cookbook from scratch where I'm going to create a recipe. So Chef, let me actually just use sudo here since I might have limited permission here. So Chef generate cookbook. Then in this folder, I'm going to create a cookbook. Let's say I'll just call it test cookbook. So basically, cookbook is another folder structure. So all the cookbooks, they are organized in this Chef repositories cookbooks folder. And if I go to this cookbooks directory, here we can see that we have this test cookbook folder, which is basically another directory structure where we get to organize our recipes, we get to organize our unit tests, etc., and so on for testing our recipes. We also store our test kitchen-based scripts as well for the sake of testing our recipes. Plus, we also have metadata.rb file that contains dependencies. Like if you have a complex package that, let's say, requires nginx, and nginx requires some other package, and that package requires yet another package. So if you have dependencies, then they are basically organized in this metadata.rb file. So here we have a cookbook folder. Here let me create a recipe. Let me just remain at this level. So next I'm going to create a recipe here. So we already have a cookbook. So Chef generate recipe in this folder, test cookbook. I'm going to create a recipe. Let's say I want to install a tree package so that I can look at directory structure and so on. So let's say I'll just call it tree install. So currently I'm creating a recipe which is nothing but just a blank Ruby file. So notice that currently I cannot execute tree command at all. I cannot look at the directory structure. So I've created this recipe so I can install the recipe. Okay, where am I? So let me open that recipe. So tree install Ruby file. So here we're going to look at some brief code that we can use for the sake of installing packages and so on. So package-wise, we have this command, so package tree, whatever package you want to install. Like you can use Apache 2 in case of Ubuntu, or you can use HTTPD if you want to install Apache web server on, let's say, CentOS, Cent operating system, or Fedora, etc., and so on. So here I'm using Ubuntu, so I should be able to use Apache too, or for now I just want to install the tree package basically. Okay, so then here we get to basically use some actions. So each resource has various actions. Like in case of packages, we have install, remove sort of actions. In case of services, we have stop, restart sort of actions. In case of file, we have create, delete sort of actions, and so on. So here in case of package, I'm going to use install. I want to install tree package basically. So I've created a simple recipe here. Then let me quickly create another one here that will be responsible for uninstalling the tree package in case if we don't require it. Okay, so or sorry, I should generate the recipe first of all. So chef generate recipe cookbooks tree uninstall. Then let me edit this one as well. So nano uninstall package tree and action remove. Okay, so basically I have a couple of recipes here, and next step is to execute these recipes. Now in casual development, or if you just want to quickly test whether the recipe is working or not, you can say, I don't care for bootstrapping any node, I don't care for chef server, I have this local machine, I've written some code, I want to test it, whether it's working properly or not. Then in that case, you can choose to execute this chef client command, which is basically responsible for executing some recipe. So in case if you want to test it on your local machine, then in that case we can pass it -z, which means that it's not going to connect to any remote server at all. It's just going to run the recipes on the local machine, which is okay for quick testing, etc., but not recommended in case of production environment. In case of production environment, rather than running the recipe like this, you'll want to deploy it to your chef server. So here, if I go to this policy folder, notice that we don't have any cookbook deployed at all. So I'm going to deploy the cookbook, and for deploying the cookbook, we get to use this tool called Burks. So Burks is basically a command line tool. Overall, the entire technology is called Burk Shell, which is basically this command line tool that allows us to upload the cookbooks onto chef server. So for this purpose, I'm going to go to my directory here and deploy the cookbook. Before you deploy the cookbook, you might want to install the dependencies as well. So currently it's a very simple package. We are just trying to install the tree package, that is it. But in more complex scenarios where you want to install Nginx, Apache, etc., and so on, you'll have dependencies basically. You'll want to rely on other packages, like maybe there's JDK requirement, maybe there is some other requirement, and so on. So in that case, you'll want to ensure that all the dependencies are installed as well. So for installing the dependencies, we get to use Burks command line. So here I'm going to install the dependencies. Here we don't have any dependency as such. And notice that Burks is connecting to Chef Supermarket website, and if there are dependencies to download, it will download them, and so on. So currently there's no dependency at all, so it didn't download anything at all. And after that, we can upload it onto the Chef server. So here I'm going to use sudo burks upload, and for now I don't want to get into details of the certificate, the SSL certificate, so I'm going to remove this requirement. So I'm going to say I do not care for the SSL verification. So basically we have uploaded the cookbooks. And notice that it knows where to deploy the cookbooks, because when you use this Burks command line tool, within this chef repository directory, it knows chef server location. If you want to know a bit more detail here, if I go to this special folder within this repository and show you this knife.rp file, you can see that the repository is already aware of chef server location basically. So basically, we have uploaded the cookbook here. So let's verify it here. I can refresh the web page and notice that we have this test cookbook. We can even look at the recipes as well that we have in this particular cookbook. So we have tree install. We can look at the code as well. Tree uninstall is there as well, and so on. So basically, we have created a cookbook. We have deployed it onto the Chef server. And now our next step is to edit the run list for the nodes. So what node should run what recipe? So for that, again, you can choose to use command line tool, which is knife or chef, etc. Or in this case, I'm going to show you how we can use the website a little bit. So here we already have this node. We can go to its edit run list. We can see the uploaded packages. For now, ignore roles. I'll discuss roles in just a bit. So here we have these recipes. Notice that we have 3 recipes, even though we created 2, but we have this 3rd recipe as well. The third recipe, the fourth one actually in this list is also called the default recipe. So ignore default recipe for now. For now, we have the named recipes. We have tree install. We have tree uninstall as well, and so on. So you can add it to your list like this if you want. And from one of my previous demos, I already have this added, so I can just ignore this one for now. So basically, you get to drag and drop your recipes. You can say we have a recipe for installing Nginx. We have a recipe for installing MySQL. We have a recipe for installing PHP and so on. So you can basically add as many recipes to as many number of nodes as you want. After that, just save the list. So we have basically added the edited the run list. So now the node knows what recipes to execute and so on. After that, you can either wait for 30 minutes. So why do we have to wait for 30 minutes? Because here we have uploaded the cookbook onto the Chef server, and we have edited the run list for a certain node. So by default, Chef waits for 30 minutes. Or to be more precise, the node waits for 30 minutes, then it automatically connects to the Chef server. It downloads the required recipes, the recipes that are connected to a certain node, the run list basically, that's downloaded by the node basically. The node is responsible for connecting to the Chef server, download the recipes, and then it executes those recipes every 30 minutes automatically. In case if you don't want to wait for 30 minutes, then in that case, you can choose to use that Chef client without any parameter whatsoever on the node. It will forcefully make the node connect to the Chef server, download all the recipes that are connected to that particular node, and execute them. So you can choose to sort of manually or forcefully download the recipes and run them as well by using Chef client without any parameter whatsoever on the node. Which is not really recommended in production environment. Usually we wait it out, we wait for 30 minutes. And again, if you don't want to wait for 30 minutes, you can choose to configure the duration as well. So for duration, we have to edit some configuration files that we cover in the Chef course that we have in detail. So basically, here we have seen how to create a cookbook, how to deploy the cookbook onto the Chef server, how to edit the run list for a node. And currently we have just one node, so I cannot show you how it looks like if you have multiple nodes, but you can imagine that it would be pretty much the same thing. So on other nodes, you will edit the run list, you'll specify what recipes to install or download on those nodes and so on. Okay, so here we have seen Chef client. So Chef client is basically executed on the node side. On each node, this tool is executed so that it can connect to the Chef server, download the recipes or the run list basically, and execute it. Burks is used for installing the dependencies and for uploading the recipes to the Chef server. Knife is a client-side tool that can be used for bootstrapping nodes, for looking at how many nodes you have, for figuring your environments and roles as well. So I'll show you Knife in detail in just a bit. And Kitchen is used for the sake of testing your recipes. So say you have written a very complex cookbook that will install various software packages, it will create the configuration file, etc. and so on, and now you want to test it. So for testing purpose, you might want to start off with a blank virtual machine that has just the fresh installation of the OS, that is it. So even setting up of the virtual machine, you might want to automate that. So Kitchen lets you do that. So Kitchen actually utilizes one more thing that is called Vagrant. Vagrant is basically the driver, if you want to call it. So it's a driver that lets you manipulate or manage various virtual machines. Like you can manage VMware-based machines, you can manage VirtualBox-based machines, and so on. So Kitchen basically allows you to install, set up a virtual machine, specify what OS you want to have, then it runs the cookbooks as well, and then you get to write some tests whether a certain package exists or not. So your goal was to install Apache Web Server. So you can write the tests that will check whether Apache Web Server has been installed by your cookbook or not. So Kitchen is basically a complete testing solution that's offered by Chef for the sake of testing the Chef cookbooks and so on. Then let me talk about Knife as well. So Knife-wise, first of all, I'm going to show you how to get just the node list, how many nodes we have. So notice that we can see the number of nodes here in this Chef Manage Web Console as well. Or we can choose to go to the command line terminal basically, and we can execute, sorry. So we can execute Knife, and very importantly, you have to be in that Chef repository-based directory. Chef repository doesn't have to be named what I have here, but it needs to be similar structure. So structure-wise, it needs to have certain number of files, directories, and so on. So here I can execute Knife. I can get the list, node list, how many nodes I have. So basically, like I mentioned, Chef Manage, the website, it's totally optional. You can choose to perform all the operations by using command line tool, which is called Knife if you want. So we have just one node for now, which is node 1. Likewise, Knife can be used for performing other operations as well, like you can manipulate your roles and environments. So let me talk about roles and environments as well. So roles, it's a very useful feature in Chef that allows you to group multiple related nodes and their run lists. So roles allows you to group the nodes and the run lists. Very common example would be you want to have, let's say, 4 or 5 web servers, 3 or 4 database servers. You want to have load balancer server as well. So each node might want to have some role basically. So benefit would be that if you have a recipe, you want to say that you want to install Apache Web Server on, let's say, 4 or 5 different machines. Then rather than saying node 1 should have Apache Web Server, node 2 should have Apache Web Server, node 3 should have Apache Web Server, you'll get fed up of manually specifying this over and over again. So you can basically create roles, and then you can say a certain node belongs to a certain role, and then you get to associate the run list with the role, not with the node itself. So this way, so let me conceptually draw this thing here. So basically, rather than saying you want to have, let's say, 4 or 5 database servers or web servers, then rather than manually saying a certain same recipe should run on all these, you can basically create a role. You can call it, let's say, web server. And you can say all these nodes have the exact same role. Then you can specify the run list for this particular role. You can say that these should act as database server. They should also act as web server. They should also have tree package and so on. So this way, you later on say, whatever nodes have certain role, I want these recipes to run on these nodes. So role is basically a very useful concept. So here I do have a couple of environments, or sorry, the roles. Let me show you a couple of roles here. So I have web server role and database server as well. Plus you can have a look at it from command line as well. So Knife role list. So here we have a couple of roles. You can also see some details as well, like you can say Knife role, let's say web server. So I want to see some more details here. So We can see what role is assigned. Currently, I don't have any run list for any role at all, but we can at least see how many roles we have. Plus, if you want to see, let's say, some nodes details, knife node show node 1. So here we can see that node 1, certain recipe is getting executed on this particular node, and it has certain environment as well. I'll talk about environment in just a bit. But in short, roles, they can be very useful. You can basically say, we want to have, let's say, 13 different database servers. We want to have 11 different web servers. And you want to have same recipes on all those particular nodes. So in that case, rather than manually specifying the run list for each and every node, you'll want to configure the role and then just connect it to your node and so on. Likewise, another very useful concept in Chef is called environment. So environment lets you mimic or sort of create multiple environments, like production, development, testing, staging, whatever environment you want. So environments, they have lots of benefits. Number one, you can say, let's say in production environment, we want to have the latest and greatest, or sorry, in production environment, we want to have the most recent stable version of Apache web server. So production should have the most recent stable version of Apache web server. But in development, we want to have the latest and greatest version, whether it's the stable version or not, we don't care. We want to have the latest version, basically. So you can specify the package version for each environment, basically. Again, each environment can have multiple nodes. So let's say 5 nodes can have production environment assigned to them. So they will have the most recent stable version, whereas the rest of the machines that have, let's say, development environment, they will have the latest and greatest version of Apache web server or whatever other application or software you're talking about and so on. Likewise, environments can also be used for the sake of generating or creating environment-specific configuration files as well. So say you have the production environment, you want to install Apache web server, so you can say I want to utilize port number 80 for the HTTP protocol and so on, whereas in case of dev environment, I want to use port number 8080 and so on. So you can generate the configuration files that are specific to the environments. Again, I do have a couple of environments here. So I have dev and prod, and out of the box, it always has this _ default environment as well. Then you can always go to any node and you can see what environment the node belongs to. You can change the node from here if you want and so on. And I believe I've already shown you this thing here. So here we can see the details for node 1, and you can see that node 1 belongs to development environment. Plus, if you want to see the environment list from command prompt, you can do that as well. So knife environment list. So we should have a couple of environments here. And if you want to see details for certain environment, you can do that as well. So again, I don't have any specific cookbook version associated with the environment, but in advanced cases, you can definitely say that production environment should have certain package version for Apache web server, MySQL, etc., and so on. Development should have a different version and so on. So definitely we can specify version number as well. So basically here we have seen various Chef concepts, and sorry, one small note. So I mentioned this part previously as well, that once you have created your cookbooks, you will want to test them as well. And for testing purpose, you will most likely want to have a blank slate. You will want to have just a fresh installation of some OS, then install everything from scratch, set up your infrastructure that you have written in by using Chef in Ruby format, and then see whether your script is running properly or not. So basically for that purpose, we could use Test Kitchen. So Test Kitchen uses various providers or drivers. One of the most commonly used drivers is Vagrant, that allows us to create VirtualBox, VMware, and other types of virtual machines. Then it runs the run list as well. It runs the recipes, then you get to write some tests whether Apache web server got installed properly, on what port it got installed, what port it's using, and so on. So you basically get to write your tests and so on. Then as part of Test Kitchen, you get to sort of converge your cookbooks as well. So converge basically means that when you make minor changes down the road and you already have installed certain packages, then converge will basically install just the delta, just the changes, merge it with the test environment, etc., just for the sake of testing whether everything is working properly or not, and so on. So basically, a Test Kitchen, it's meant for testing your cookbooks and so on. So Chef, it's definitely a very, very useful automation option that you can utilize in your DevOps-based process or without DevOps as well. So if your goal is to set up your infrastructure, whether your dev environment, prod environment, test environment, you can use Chef for that purpose. So any question regarding Chef? So definitely it's just a quick overview of the entire technology. So if you guys have questions, feel free to type them in the questions box. And then, so WebEdge is a consulting as well as a training company, so we do offer various courses as well. So if you want to focus on just the Chef portion, then for that we have a very thorough course, so managing infrastructure as code with Chef Server. So please feel free to contact us. We'll provide you the outline and the course number and so on. Or if you want to focus on the entire DevOps process where Chef is sort of a small component, then in that case we have a course for that as well. Okay, there's a question regarding the presentation. So definitely I'll give you the link again. So those guys who joined earlier on, the link was sent out, and those guys who joined just recently, I'll send the link in the chat window. So if you guys go to webinars chat window, you will see a couple of links. They are both exactly the same actually. One is just the shortened URL, the bit.ly version. So you can click one of these links to download the presentation. Okay, so thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure to be here with you. So hopefully you got to have overview of Chef. Thank you again.